You're out of compliance. You know that, don't you? The voice was a screeching, polished fingernail on the sun-baked silence of our ranch. My heart dropped. A familiar, sinking stone. I saw her before I saw the problem, a sleek, black SUV idling in the dirt. A woman with a severe bob and an even more severe expression. Her name was Karen, and she was our HOA enforcer, though she preferred the title Community Standards Officer. What was she targeting today? The worn paint on the barn. The chickens that occasionally wandered too close to the property line. It was always something. A relentless, soul-sucking assault on our peaceful existence. But this time, this was different. This time, her focus was on Grandpa's masterpiece, the stone well he'd built with his own 2 hands. The one that had supplied our family for 3 generations. It's an unapproved permanent structure, she declared, her eyes cold as ice as she gestured with her clipboard. And frankly, it's a hazard. The board has voted. It needs to be demolished. Today, a sharp intake of breath escaped my lungs. Demolished. The sound of the wind chimes suddenly felt deafening. A frantic, desperate music against the weight of her words. How could she even suggest such a thing? My grandmother, a woman whose fiery spirit had been tempered by years of raising 3 children and 100 cattle, stepped out onto the porch, her face a mask of disbelief. Demolished, she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. That well is older than you are. Young lady. Karen just sniffed, adjusting the collar of her crisp white blouse. Age is irrelevant. The structure was built without the proper permits and doesn't conform to the aesthetic guidelines of the community. She said community like it was a foreign word, something she'd learned from a textbook. I saw my mother's shoulders slump. A tired, resigned gesture. We'd been fighting this battle for years, and the attrition was wearing us all down. But then, I saw Grandpa. He was sitting on the porch swing, slowly whittling a piece of wood. He didn't speak. He just kept carving. A rhythmic, steady motion that was both calming and deeply unsettling. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped my lips. A silent plea for this to be over. But I knew it wouldn't be. Not today. As Karen started to detail the list of fines and the timeline for demolition, I saw a flicker of movement in the dust near my feet. A small, black ant was struggling to carry a crumb. An insignificant detail, but my mind clung to it. A small moment of normalcy in the face of this utter absurdity. That's when it hit me. Something my grandpa had told me when I was just a boy. About the original land deed. The founding fathers of this ranch, he said, had a deep, almost sacred respect for the land. It's not just dirt and grass. Son, he'd said, it's the foundation of everything. My hands started to tremble, a nervous energy surging through me. Was it possible? Could there be a loophole? I excused myself, my voice a little shaky, and sprinted into the house, my feet kicking up a cloud of ochre dust. I needed to find that old deed, the one tucked away in the fireproof safe in Grandpa's study. I tore through old ledgers and yellowed photographs, a whirlwind of frantic energy. The pages of the deed were brittle and smelled of history, but the words were still there, clear and bold. I felt a surge of hope, a desperate, rising tide. What I found was better than a loophole. It was a complete and total trump card. The truth, a long-buried secret known only to a few, was written right there in the original legal covenant. The ranch, our family's home for generations, wasn't just a property within the HOA's jurisdiction. It was a historical landmark, a designated heritage homestead. And under state law, certain traditional structures, like a hand-built well, were explicitly protected from demolition. Not only that, but the covenant also stipulated that the homestead's aesthetic was to be preserved in perpetuity, meaning the HOA was actually legally obligated to protect its rustic charm, not tear it down. The irony was so thick it felt like I could chew it. But there was another twist, a gut-wrenching detail that made my stomach churn. The property had been sold to the community with a deed restriction, and the restriction stated that a portion of the land, the area surrounding our well, was a designated community common space and was supposed to be maintained by the HOA itself. Karen wasn't just being a bully. She was trying to destroy a landmark that her own organization was responsible for preserving. She wasn't just a cop. She was an embezzler. A snake in the grass trying to hide her failures by tearing down our history. I burst back outside. The papers clutched in my hand like a winning lottery ticket. "Karen!" I yelled, my voice cracking with a mix of fury and exhilaration. She turned, a look of annoyance on her face. "I'm busy, young man. I'm afraid your histrionics won't change a thing." I didn't even bother to respond. I just held up the documents, the sun glinting off the antique ink. My grandmother's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. My mother let out a small, quiet gasp. All eyes were on me. The dramatic confrontation was about to begin, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. But before I could say a word, a deep, resonant voice cut through the air. "Son." It was Grandpa. He stood up from the porch swing, the piece of wood he'd been whittling now a perfect, smooth handle. He walked with a steady, purposeful gait towards Karen, his boots crunching on the gravel. He wasn't a tall man, but he seemed to grow in stature with every step. Karen tried to stand her ground, but her confident posture was starting to waver. She saw the look in his eyes, a look that wasn't anger, but something far more potent, certainty. He stopped a few feet from her and held out his hand. He wasn't reaching for the deed, but for her clipboard. Confused, she hesitated for a moment. Then, almost instinctively, handed it to him. He didn't read it. He just flipped it over, revealing a blank back. Then, with the calm and deliberate motion of a man who had done this 1,000 times before, he pulled a pencil from his pocket and, with the clipboard resting on the fence post, he began to draw. He wasn't drawing a picture. He was drawing a map. A crude, but unmistakable, map of our ranch, the well, and the community common space that was supposed to be surrounding it. The sound of his pencil scratching against the paper was the only sound in the universe. Everyone was holding their breath. He finished the map, then handed the clipboard back to her. "Read it out loud," he said, his voice a low rumble. Karen, flustered and confused, began to read. The Heritage Homestead, a designated historical site. The well, protected. The surrounding land, a community common space, maintained by the HOA. Her voice grew softer with each word, the arrogance draining from it like water from a sieve. Her face was turning a shade of pale green. The frontier justice wasn't a fight. It was a declaration. It was an intellectual, psychological checkmate. The tables were turned, and the rules she had tried to use against us were now being used to expose her own corruption. He wasn't just defending our home. He was exposing the truth. The final straw came when a neighbor, a kind old man named Mr. Henderson, who had been watching from his yard, walked over. "You know, Mrs. Karen," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been trying to get the HOA to fix that fence on the community common space for 6 months now. The one that's been falling apart right over there." He pointed a gnarled finger toward the far side of our well, to a section of rickety, collapsing wood. "You said there wasn't money in the budget." Karen's face went completely white. The jig was up. She had been pocketing the funds meant for the community, and her attempt to demolish our well was a desperate, ham-fisted attempt to cover her tracks. She had miscalculated, severely underestimating a family who knew their land and their history better than she knew her own rulebook. The air crackled with the sound of a woman's entire world collapsing. Her shoulders drooped. Her head bowed. The clipboard slipped from her hand, landing with a muted thud in the dust. The arrogant, hateful HOA cop had been beaten, not by fists or shouts, but by the quiet, unwavering power of truth and a wise old man's frontier justice. She got into her car, not with a slam, but with a defeated, pathetic whisper of a door closing, and drove away, leaving behind a trail of dust and the silence of a victory well earned. We stood there for a long time, the four of us, just soaking it all in. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The chickens had come back to peck at the ground near the well, clucking contentedly. Grandpa finally turned to me, a faint, knowing smile on his face. "Never forget, son," he said, his voice a warm comfort. "The land tells its own story. You just have to be quiet enough to listen." The well, our well, stood there, a testament to our family's history, and a monument to the simple, profound power of knowing your roots. It was more than just a well. It was the heart of our home, and we had fought for it, not with anger, but with an unshakable truth.